Hey y'all, we're sewing another Tinsley pattern. This is the fully lined tennis dress that I'm working on. If you want to see the other options sewn up, I will link them down below. The first step is going to be to sew your side bodice to your front bodice. I do like to add a clip at the top of the side bodice so I don't get it mixed up. And you're just going to match the notches and then match each end and ease the curves into place. Make sure that the right sides are together, and then you're going to sew the side panel to that center front bodice with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and you're going to do the same thing with the other side panel and on the other side of the bodice. Once you have these sewn, you can press the seam towards one side and top stitch in place if you'd like. Once you have those side panels sewn on, it is time to sew the side seams. So I'm going to take my back piece and place it right sides together with my front bodice. And I'm going to sew them along each side, creating the side seams. And I'm using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then I'm going to do the same thing with my lining pieces. So I'm going to take my lining front and back, place them right sides together, and sew along each side with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Once both lining and main bodices are finished, you can flip them right side out and just set them aside while we start to work on our shorties. So you're going to take the pocket piece and you're going to press the top edge a 1/2 inch toward the wrong side and then edge stitch it in place on each pocket piece. Then you're going to take your pocket piece and you're going to grab your side panels, and with the right side of the side panel facing up and the right side of the pocket facing up, you're going to place the pocket directly on top of the side panel, matching the notches and all the raw edges, and you're going to base the pocket to the side panel along the two sides and the bottom edge just to hold the pocket in place while we're constructing the rest of the shorties, and you're going to do this with each side panel piece. Now it's time to attach the side panels to the front center piece. So I have the front center shorties with the right side up, and I'm placing my side panel on top so they are right sides together, and I'm aligning the notches and the raw edges, and I'm going to stitch them together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and you're going to do this with each side panel. And if you want, you can press the seam toward one side and top stitch it in place. Next, you're going to attach the back pieces to the side panel. So I have again my pieces laid out flat with the right sides up, and I'm going to put one back piece with the right sides together, aligning the notches and those raw edges, and you're going to stitch the back piece to the side panel with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And you're going to do this on both sides and back pieces, and then again, if you want, you can press the seam toward one side and top stitch. Now I'm going to fold my piece in half so that the back two pieces are right sides together, and aligning those raw edges, you're going to stitch the two back pieces together along the curve with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now we're going to attach the gusset. So I have found the center of the gusset and the center front of my shorties, and I'm going to place them right sides together, matching these centers, and then I'm going to match each edge and then ease the curves into place along both sides of the gusset. And then you're going to stitch the gusset to the front center with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And next, it's time to attach the gusset to the back piece. So I'm going to fold the gusset in half and find the center again. And just to note that the notched edge is going to match the back piece. The notches don't match anything, it's just so you know which side gets attached to the back. So I'm going to find the center, and then I'm going to match that center to the back center seam, making sure the right sides are together. And I'm going to match each edge and then again ease those curves into place. And then I'm going to sew the gusset to the back pieces with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then I'm going to give the gusset a nice press. And the final step for the shorties is going to be to press the hem a 1/2 inch toward the wrong side on each leg, and then edge stitch in place. And then again, give each leg a nice press with your iron. Then you can go ahead and set your shorties aside while we work on the skirt portion. So first we need to sew the side panels to the center front skirt. If you're doing the slit option, then you will sew until you hit the notch, and then you will press the unsewn edges to the wrong side. There is another video that shows how to do the slits, and again, I'll link it down below. It's the other tennis dress video. So this one I'm just doing the plain skirt. So I'm just going to sew each side panel right sides together to the center skirt with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And you can press it toward one side and top stitch in place. Double check that if you pressed and top stitched your bodice, that you're pressing and top stitching the skirt in the same direction. Next, we're going to sew the front skirt to the back skirt. So put the back skirt and front skirt right sides together and align those raw edges. And we are going to stitch them together on each side with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, creating the side seams of the skirt. Next, you're going to press the edge along the hem a 1/2 inch toward the wrong side, and then edge stitch the hem in place and give it a nice press once you're through with the hem. Now we're going to attach the main front bodice to the skirt. So you're going to quarter both the bodice and the skirt, and you're going to turn your bodice wrong side out and place it over the skirt so they are right sides together. And you're going to match the quarter points, and you also want to make sure that your bodice seaming and the skirt seaming are perfectly matched. You can baste just that portion where the seaming is together along the front, so you make sure that they are perfectly aligned and matching nicely. And then you're going to sew the bodice to the skirt with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And if you want, you can press the seam toward one side and top stitch it in place. And then you can set that aside while we work on the lining pieces. Then we're going to put together our lining pieces. So I have the shorties and the lining bodice, and I have quartered both, and I'm going to flip the lining bodice wrong side out and place it over the shorties so they're right sides together. And I'm going to match each quarter point, and then I'm going to take it to my machine and I'm going to sew the lining bodice to the shorties with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And again, you can press it toward one side and top stitch if you like. Now I have my lining pieces right side out and my main pieces right side out, and you are going to slip the lining inside of the main piece, and you're going to align all the top raw edges. So match the side seams, the front pickup, all along the back, and I just like to pin them together to make sure everything is aligned nicely. And once I have them pinned together along the top, I'm going to take it to my sewing machine and I'm going to baste the lining to that main piece, and I just do it about 1/8 of an inch from the top edge all around the front and back. And once you have those basted together, you're just going to treat them as one piece. You're almost finished. Now we just have to attach all the binding. So make sure you prep your binding pieces. It really saves a lot of time once we go to attach it. So I'm going to find the center front of the neckline binding and the center front of the bodice, and I am going to attach the binding to the wrong side of the center front. So the right side of the binding is to the wrong side of the bodice, and I'm going to pin that binding in place, matching these centers and the edge, and then easing the rest into place. And you're going to sew the binding directly on that first crease, and it's going to be a smaller seam allowance if you did the thinner binding, and it's going to be a larger seam allowance if you did the thick binding. Once I have the binding stitched to the bodice, I'm going to refold and press the binding toward the right side, and I'm going to fold it over the raw edges, enclosing those edges and also covering that first seam. And then I'm going to edge stitch the binding in place. And then I'm going to give it a really nice press. If you did one of the scoop back options, then you'll go ahead and finish the back neckline in the same way. Now we're going to work on our strap. So I have sewn my binding piece together, and I'm going to match the right side of the binding to the wrong side of the bodice. I'm matching the seam of the binding to the side seam of the bodice, and then the front strap marking to the front strap pickup, and then you ease the rest of the binding in place. And then I'm going to match the back strap marking to the back bodice. If you did the full back like I did here, there should be just enough room on the back to sew the two binding pieces together, and they should meet in the center. So you can make sure to baste the back bindings or pin them really nicely. You just want the two back binding pieces to match in the back center. So I'm going to ease this in place, and then I'm going to sew the binding to the bodice, again stitching in that first crease line of the binding. Once the binding is sewn on, I'm going to press it toward the right side and refold and press the binding over the raw edge so they're all covered, and over that first seam line, and I'm going to pin the binding in place and edge stitch it not only where the bodice meets but all the way around the strap. And then I'm going to repeat the process and do the same thing with the other binding piece on the other side of the bodice. The last step is to use the bar tack markings on your pattern piece or at the top edge of the full back pattern piece like I did here. Create 3 lines of bar tacks across both straps to hold them in place. I like to use a longer straight stitch for this, or you can use a chain stitch on your cover stitch machine. You can add a small piece of tearaway interfacing to the back side of the straps to give it a little more stabilization while you're stitching if you find your machine's moving around or not having trouble creating those bar tacks. And that is it. Your Tinsley is complete. If you have any questions, as always, you can leave them down below and I will try to answer them. If you make a Tinsley pattern, we would love to see them, And please post them in our Facebook group or tag us on Instagram at Made for Mermaids, hashtag Made for Mermaids Patterns.